man is a beast or an angel, depending on his thinking. Your thinking sets up a state of vibration in your being. In your deep nature, there is a reservoir of energy, and that energy moves in accordance to how you think and your state of consciousness. I like to see it as an internal sun. There is an inner sun within us, and as we think, so it moves. The sun will move and energize the areas corresponding with that level of thinking. If we are overwhelmed by lust, then that is exactly where the sun will find release. If we are inspired by a higher destiny, higher aspirations, leading to a more subtle and mystical consideration of life, then the sun will move upward into the higher human atmosphere and energize that region. And the places that it's furthest from becomes darkest. The idea that the greater the light, the greater the shadow. So when the mind is purified and the sun is energizing the higher regions of human consideration, then the lower passions, drives and ambitions become darkened. And when the sun descends, because it's always ascending or descending, it's rarely ever stagnant. But when the sun descends and lightens up the lower passions, then the higher aspirations, the higher motivations are darkened. And then we feel like we're in the dark, we feel like we're disconnected, we feel like we are not in alignment with reality. The great equalizer is the heart. When the sun reaches the heart space, this is the great equalizer. The heart can reconcile extremes. It is the perfect amount of light to see all things. It is not all the way up in complete mystical abstraction that everything below becomes impossible to comprehend, nor is it exhausted by the lower drives and passions, making the spirit imperceivable. This is why so many religions will have the fiery heart in their symbolism, the heart with the sunlight coming from it, or a fire illuminating it, because it's in the heart that all things are reconciled. All extremes are brought into harmony. So the idea of man being created in God's image is really something that has to be interpreted on a greater level than just what we see. We're talking about something deeper than what we see on the surface. It is that internal light in you that is moving constantly. As a man thinketh in his heart, so is he. That this energy, the light inside us, moves in accordance to our consciousness, in our conscious thoughts, our thinking. It's the old Christian idea that the conscience itself is the guardian angel. That the conscience itself, the reason why we ignore it, the reason why we never listen to it, is because it's tying you to your higher destiny. And if you listen to it, you may have to give up a lot. You may have to sacrifice your comforts. You may have to sacrifice and let go of addiction patterns of addiction, unnecessary behavior that we've gotten used to. So we ignore our conscience, because actually the idea was that it was your connection to divinity. And by following it, and by letting go of the things we're attached to, and allowing the conscience to speak and to guide us, would actually wake us up to destiny. So we have to consider these things and begin to recognize that we are here for a reason, that we have energies and powers inside of us that we misuse. We should be using them towards greater aspirations, and we have them, we know we have them. We know we have dreams and powers and potentials. They're there. We feel them. We ignore them to the most part, they go neglected, but they're there, we know they are. And now and then we feel what it's like to fulfill that. It feels good. But most of the time we just put ourselves back to sleep and go along with what's comfortable and secure. And so we can begin to look at ourselves as great containers of destiny. The chalice, the cup, the mystic vessel that receives is really us, when we have emptied ourselves of illusion and allowed the onset of reality. We begin to see that the cup is filled no longer by mindless passions and addictions, and vice of every kind, but the cup becomes filled gradually by the very nectar of heaven. Now, what do I mean by that? Our body is a laboratory, and we are constantly letting things in that determine the end product of this internal experimentation of consciousness. We eat certain foods, we feel a certain way. We do certain things, we feel a certain way. We create certain things, we allow energies to move. We're always in this state of experiment. And the great experiment of life is to understand the mysticism of the human being, of ourselves. But we spend most of our life in a state of external experimentation. But we have all these mystic symbols that indicate the internal movement of energies, the internal movement of the elements, water, air, fire, earth. These elements are inside of us, and it's understanding and reconciling these that the great experiment takes place, which is the subject of all deep religion. The secret symbols of all religion are pointing at the divine alchemy of the human being. The cup, as I mentioned, is a receptacle for that wisdom. As it says in the Bible, we do not live on bread alone, but by every word uttered from the mouth of God. Now, the mouth of God is a symbol. The word salvation means salivate, and the word of God salivates wisdom endlessly. And that salivation drips into the cup, the chalice, the Holy Grail, which is the heart. So when God enters your mind, you receive salvation in the heart, which is the cup. So we do not live on bread alone, which means we try to succeed in life by everything outside of us. We've got all the food that we can imagine, we've got all the money that we could ever hope for, and still there's a feeling that something isn't being satisfied. Well, the idea of salvation is that you are the cup, the receptacle, that receives from the fountain of reality, rather than the deep well of illusion. All these symbols can be reconciled by walking the path. A religion will always be criticized. It will always be an enigma to someone who isn't walking the path. The mystic path. What is the mystic path? The mystic path, the religious path, the spiritual path, there's 100 different ways to name it. It's simply the realization that most of your life is being run by what religion would call the beast, or the dark nature of us. So much of what we do is not run out of genuine destiny and higher aspiration, but lower ambition, security, fear, anxiety. When this is reconciled and understood, we no longer feed the beast. In other words, when we feel like we are overwhelmed by lust, what do? We unconsciously move towards it. Maybe we put it off for a while, but we're going to fulfill it because we haven't reconciled our true nature. That feeling that you get when lust comes upon you. Now, sexual lust, of course, is the strongest. It is what ties us to this world. The mystic is the person who realizes that this energy that comes through us is not actually in itself lust. It is only the conditioned nature to fulfill it through that channel. We begin to realize that that energy is not lust in itself. It is actually the very primal life force moving upwards, and it reaches the lower centers first. So your instinct tells you that you are sexually active, you are ripe and ready for the release and use of lust. But that's not it. It's only telling you that because that's where it currently is. If you ignore it, consciously resist the temptation, you'll find that it will move further upwards into places that you didn't even know existed. That lust will move upwards and it will reach the solar plexus. And it's called the solar plexus because that's the place where the inner sun is born. the Son of God is born in a manger in Bethlehem, which means the belly. And so you have to resist that constant cyclical temptation of lust in order to bypass the beast. And when that happens, the sun is finally in place of solar power. And then you realize that God created man in his image from the waist up. Everything below the waist is the beast. And until that inner sun is ignited in the belly, you will always be at the mercy of the beast. You'll be at the mercy of the lower nature, the animal nature. Now I'm using these words, beast, animal nature. I don't have a bias towards any religion. So I'm using these words to get across the idea. And I like the symbols, they're fascinating. So we begin to recognize that when man finally awakens the fire within him, now you understand what the mystic life is. Now you have reconciled destiny versus the ambition, aspiration versus ambition. And when you awaken this fire within you, you will no longer be able to live the way that you've lived, because the inconsistencies will become so obvious, and this fire inside us will burn up all of those obstacles. So this is why the mystic path is a dedication. It's something that you have to choose. You have to want it. Seek and you'll find. Knock and it will be opened. But here's the great thing. Most people don't want. Most people don't seek. They want everything handed to them, but they will not go out of their way to say, okay, I'm ready. I want it. People don't do that. They just hope that something kind of rains down on them one day, and it's all happening for them. But no, you have to seek. You have to want. Now seeking is secondary. The wanting is the prime. It's the primal desire. You have to want the truth. You have to want reality more than you want illusion. And so this is a kind of interesting place to conclude this video. And that is, do you really want to know the mysteries? Do you want to experience them within yourself as realities? And to realize that a lot of religion is actually pointing at something far greater than what the surface can ever actually explain. Because true religion is an internal experience. It is not an outer ceremony. It's not bells and whistles. It is something deeper and more mysterious. And true religion allows us to also appreciate all the different philosophies, metaphysics, sciences. It doesn't exclude these things. True religion is not exclusionary. It allows the good, the true, and the beautiful of all things to enter into our experience.